He promised to wait for me at the altar, said he would love me, even if the world ended tomorrow. On that cold April morning, while the cherry blossoms of Jeju scattered petals like tears over the ancestral garden, I believed, with every fiber of my being, that the universe would finally be kind to me. But when the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, he had already disappeared. No note, no trace, no explanation. Only the sound of the cutting wind passing through the white curtains of the room where I should have been dressing as a bride, and the empty echo of my own footsteps on the ancient wooden floor that creaked as if crying with me. My name is Ha-Rin. I am 28 years old, and this is the story of how the love of my life left me alone at the altar, and how, in the forgotten basement of his family's house, I discovered the truth he hid until his last breath. A truth that shattered me into 1,000 pieces, and then taught me to rebuild myself, piece by piece, scar by scar. Before I continue, I need to ask you something, and this comes from the depths of my heart. If you have ever loved someone who destroyed you while trying to save you, if you have ever felt the weight of silence from someone who left without explanation, if you have ever woken up in the middle of the night with your chest tight and your hands trembling, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because I want more people to know they are not alone in this pain, that we can break and still learn to flourish again, and that sometimes the truest love is the one we only understand when it is too late. The house stood atop a hill, hidden among pine trees and century-old cherry blossoms, surrounded by a stone wall covered with moss and wild ivy. It was the retreat of Minjun's family, the man I was going to marry, the man who, for 3 years, taught me to believe I deserved to be loved. The architecture was traditional, a hanok with dark beams, curved roof, hanji paper windows that filtered sunlight like ancient dreams. The garden had a small pond with golden carp, an arched wooden bridge, and stone lanterns covered in lichen that seemed like guardians of forgotten secrets. I remember every detail, the smell of ginger and honey tea that his mother, Mrs. Kim, prepared every morning, serving it in fine porcelain cups decorated with flying cranes. The distant sound of laughter coming from the kitchen, where the older aunts peeled garlic and told stories from when they were young, their voices mixing with the sizzle of oil in the frying pan. The gentle warmth of paper lanterns that trembled in the night wind, projecting dancing shadows on the wooden walls like friendly ghosts. I felt safe there, welcomed, as if that place had been created by the universe specifically so that love could flourish without fear. But sometimes, life hides devastating storms behind the clearest days, and I, innocent, did not know I was about to face the greatest of them all. I met Minjun 3 years earlier, on a rainy October afternoon in Hongdae. I was running from one art class to another, with my portfolio under my arm and my hair soaked because I had forgotten my umbrella at home. I entered a small cafe, one with exposed brick walls and plants hanging from the ceiling, just to take shelter from the rain and dry off a bit. He was sitting in the corner with a laptop open and huge headphones, completely absorbed in whatever he was doing. He wore a gray turtleneck sweater and black framed glasses that slipped down his nose. He had that air of someone who was there not to work, but to escape from the world outside. I ordered a latte and sat at the table next to his, trying to reorganize my drawings that had gotten slightly damp from the rain. That was when one of the papers escaped from my hand and flew, landing exactly on top of his laptop keyboard. "Sorry," I said, standing up quickly, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. He removed his headphones, picked up the paper carefully, and looked at the drawing, a sketch of a woman looking out of a train window, with the landscape blurred behind her. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just observed, tilting his head slightly, as if analyzing every line, every shading. "Is this yours?" he finally asked, raising his eyes to me. Yes, sorry, I didn't—" "It's beautiful," he interrupted, and there was such genuine sincerity in his voice that my heart gave a small leap. "The way you captured loneliness, it feels like you can sense what she's thinking." And that was it. It was at that exact moment, with the rain beating against the window and the smell of coffee and fresh bread in the air, that our story began. We talked for 3 hours, about art, about music, about the places we dreamed of knowing, about the scars we carried from past loves. He told me he worked in graphic design, but his real dream was to photograph remote landscapes. I told him I wanted to be a children's book illustrator, but my parents thought I should pursue a more stable career. When we finally left the cafe, the rain had stopped, and the sky was tinged with orange and purple. He walked me to the subway station, and before we said goodbye, He took my hand, slowly, as if asking permission silently. "Can I see you again?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that completely disarmed me. "Yes," I replied. "Please." And so we saw each other again, and again, and again, until the meetings turned into routine, and routine turned into necessity, and necessity turned into love. The first months with Min-jun were like living inside a waking dream. He had the gift of transforming the simplest moments into unforgettable memories. A walk through Namsan Park became an adventure when he insisted on climbing the mountain on foot, stopping at every curve to take photos, not of the landscape, but of me. "You are more beautiful than any view," he would say, and I would laugh, pushing him playfully, but secretly loving every word. We spent weekends exploring flea markets in Dongmyo, looking for old vinyl records and broken cameras that he swore he could fix. We ate tteokbokki at street stalls, sitting on uncomfortable plastic stools, laughing when the spicy sauce made our eyes water. At night, we returned to his tiny apartment in Yeonam-dong, and he cooked ramyeon while I drew, and the TV played quietly in the background, and everything was perfectly, absolutely right. He had small habits that I adored, like the way he stirred his coffee, always exactly 7 times, never more, never less, like how he hummed when he was concentrated, songs he did not even realize he was singing, like how he held my hand when we crossed the street, squeezing 3 times, our silent way of saying, "I love you." But there were also moments of silence, moments when he seemed far away, even while being by my side. He would look out the window with an expression I could not decipher, something between melancholy and acceptance. When I asked what he was thinking, he always smiled and said, "Nothing important," or, "Just thinking about you." I should have noticed, should have insisted, but I was so happy, so immersed in that love, that I ignored the signs, because sometimes, when we are happy, we become voluntarily blind to the shadows lurking at the edges. 6 months after we met, he took me to Nami Island. It was autumn, and the ginkgo trees were in such a vibrant yellow that it seemed unreal, as if we were walking inside a painting. We rented bicycles and pedaled through the avenues, the crispy leaves bursting under the tires, the cold air filling our lungs. We stopped near the lake, and he set up a small picnic, kimbap that he had prepared himself, a little crooked, but made with love, strawberries, and a bottle of peach juice. We sat on an old checkered blanket, watching the ducks glide across the water. "Harin," he said suddenly, his voice unusually serious. I replied, biting into a strawberry. "If I asked you to never forget me, could you do it?" The question caught me by surprise. I looked at him, trying to understand the expression on his face. "Why are you talking like that? It sounds like you are saying goodbye." He smiled, but it was that smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am not saying goodbye. Just I want to make sure that whatever happens, you will remember this day, this feeling, how happy we were. Of course I will remember," I said, touching his face. How could I forget? He pulled me into a long, tight embrace, as if he were trying to store me inside him, and he whispered in my ear, "Thank you for loving me." At that time, I thought he was just being romantic and dramatic. Today, I understand it was a disguised farewell, a goodbye I was not ready to hear. He proposed to me on a winter night, in December, when Seoul was covered in snow, and Christmas lights blinked on every street. We had gone to dinner at a small restaurant in Itaewon, one of those hidden places that only locals know, with only 6 tables and a chef who cooked in plain view of everyone. After dinner, we walked aimlessly, our breaths forming white clouds in the freezing air. He was quiet, quieter than normal, and I respected his silence, just holding his gloved hand. We stopped in front of an old record store, the window full of faded posters of bands from the 80s. The snow fell gently, accumulating on our hair, on our shoulders. "Harin," he said, turning to me. "Yes." He took a deep breath, and I saw his eyes shine. I do not know if they were tears, or just the reflection of the streetlights. Then, right there, on the snowy sidewalk, he knelt down. My heart stopped. "I do not have a prepared speech," he began, his voice trembling. "I am not good with beautiful words, but I know that you are the only person I want to be with, no matter what the future brings, no matter how much time we have. I want every second by your side." He took out a small velvet box from his coat pocket. Inside, there was a simple ring, a thin white gold band with a small blue stone. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you for as long as we have?" I was crying. laughing and crying at the same time. Yes! Of course, yes! He slid the ring onto my finger with trembling hands, then stood up and hugged me so tight that my feet left the ground. People passed by us, some smiling, others not even noticing, lost in their own worlds. But we were in our own universe, a universe where time did not matter, where the future was bright, where nothing bad could reach us. How wrong I was. In the months following the engagement, something changed, subtle but undeniable. Minjun began to have frequent appointments that he did not fully explain. Routine medical checkups, he would say vaguely when I asked. Back problems from sitting at the computer all day. He also lost weight. Not drastically, but enough for me to notice that his cheeks were more hollow, that his favorite sweater hung a little looser on his shoulders. When I commented, he laughed and said he was trying to get in shape for the wedding. There were days when he was visibly tired. His eyes had deep circles under them, and he slept more than normal. Long naps on the couch in the afternoon, waking up disoriented, as if he did not know where he was. Are you okay? I would ask, worried. I am fine, he would reply, kissing my forehead. Just stressed with work. And I believed him, because I wanted to believe, because the alternative, the possibility that something was deeply wrong, was too terrifying to consider. One night I woke up, and he was not in bed. I found him sitting on the living room floor with his back to me, looking out the window at the city lights. I approached silently and saw that he was holding something, folded white papers. Minjun? He startled, quickly hiding the papers under a cushion. Hey, what are you doing awake? I could ask the same thing, I said, sitting next to him. Cannot sleep? Just thinking about the wedding, he said, but his voice sounded false. Nervous, you know. I rested my head on his shoulder. You do not need to be nervous. It will be perfect. He put his arm around me, pulling me closer. Promise me that, no matter what happens, you will continue being you. Strong, beautiful, full of life. Why do you keep talking like that? I asked, starting to get really worried. As if something bad is going to happen? It will not, he said quickly. I just want to make sure you know how special you are. Later, when he finally returned to bed and fell asleep, I went back to the living room. I searched under the cushion and found the papers he had hidden. They were medical prescriptions, names of medications I did not recognize, and a date marked for oncological follow-up appointment. Oncological. My blood froze, but when I looked at him sleeping in the bedroom, so peaceful, so vulnerable, I could not confront him. I told myself it was probably a mistake, an old health problem that he had already resolved, something insignificant that he did not think was necessary to mention. I put the papers back and never mentioned it, and that is one of my greatest regrets, not forcing the conversation, not demanding the truth, not fighting for him when he was clearly fighting alone. 2 weeks before the wedding, we traveled to Jeju to finalize preparations and spend a few days with his family. The ancestral house was located on that magical island, and it was there that the ceremony would take place, following family tradition. The ferry trip was calm. We stayed on the upper deck, the sea wind messing up our hair, the smell of salt in the air. Minjun was especially quiet, looking at the horizon where the sea met the sky. Do you love the sea? I asked. I do, he replied. It always reminds me that we are small, that our problems, our pain, are minuscule compared to the immensity of the universe. That should be comforting, I said, but it sounds kind of sad. He smiled. Maybe, but it is also liberating. It means we do not have to carry everything alone, that it is okay to let go. I did not fully understand what he meant, not at that moment. When we arrived at the house, we were warmly welcomed by the family. Mrs. Kim hugged us with tears in her eyes, happy to finally have her son back home. Minjun's father, Mr. Kim, a man of few words but with a kind look, squeezed my hand and said, "Welcome to the family, daughter." The following days were a flurry of preparations. We tried on traditional clothes, discussed menus with the local chef, organized flower arrangements, reviewed the guest list. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. But at night, when everyone was asleep, I still heard Minjun awake. Footsteps in the hallway, the creaking of the floorboards, sometimes the muffled sound of someone crying. On the third night, I could not take it anymore. I followed the sounds and found him in the garden, sitting on the arched bridge over the pond, his feet dangling over the dark water. Minjun? He quickly wiped his face with the back of his hand. Harin, you should be sleeping. I sat next to him, our shoulders touching. You should be too. We stayed in silence for a long time, listening to the distant croaking of frogs and the whisper of wind through the trees. "Are you scared?" I asked gently. "Of the wedding?" "No," he said. "I am not afraid of marrying you. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Then what are you afraid of?" He took a deep breath, and for a moment I thought he would finally tell me, that he would share with me the weight he was carrying alone. But then he just said, "Of not being enough for you." "You are more than enough," I said, holding his hand. "You are everything." He intertwined our fingers and brought my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles one by one. "Remember that, okay? When everything seems confusing, remember that you were everything to me too." Once again, I interpreted it as romanticism, as pre-wedding nervousness, as intense and poetic love, not as a farewell. On the eve of the wedding, the sky was tinged with orange and violet, and the air smelled of wet earth and cherry blossoms. Min-jun found me on the side veranda of the house, the one overlooking the valley where the mountains met the distant sea. He wore a white linen shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and there was a sadness in his eyes that I could not name, something between melancholy and resignation, something that seemed like a farewell disguised as love. "Come here," he said softly, extending his hand. I placed my hand in his, and he pulled me into an embrace, slowly, as if he were memorizing the shape of my body against his. His fingers slid through my neck, intertwining in my loose hair. He smelled my hair, my neck, as if he were trying to engrave my scent in his memory. "Harin," he whispered against my forehead. If I am not here tomorrow, promise you will continue living?" I laughed. I thought it was a joke. One of those dramatic things he sometimes said. "Min-jun, you are being melodramatic. Promise," he insisted, his voice more serious. Okay, I said, pulling away slightly to look into his eyes. "I promise. But of course you will be there. You are the groom." He smiled, but it was a broken smile. A smile from someone who knows something the other does not know. There was pain there, so much pain that, for a second, it scared me. And then he kissed me, long, deep, desperate, as if it were the last, as if he were trying to transfer his entire existence to me through that kiss. His hands trembled against my face, and when we separated I saw there were tears in his eyes. "Hey," I said, wiping away a tear that escaped. "Why are you crying?" "Because I love you," he said simply, "more than you will ever know." "I love you too," I said, smiling, trying to lighten the heavy mood. "And tomorrow, we will be promising that in front of everyone." "Yes," he said, but his voice was empty. Tomorrow. That night I could not sleep. I stayed looking out the window of the guest room, watching the shadows of the trees dance under the full moon, listening to the distant song of crickets and the soft sound of the stream that cut through the garden. My heart was restless, as if it knew something my mind still refused to accept. At 3 a.m, I heard the door to Min-jun's room open and footsteps descending the stairs. I got up silently and followed him, keeping my distance. I saw him enter the basement, that forbidden place about which the grandmother had warned me. I stayed hidden at the top of the stairs, watching the faint light of a lantern dancing on the walls down below. I heard the sound of papers being moved, a drawer being opened and closed. And then, after what seemed like hours, but was probably just minutes, he came back up. When he passed by me without seeing me, because I was hidden in the shadows, I saw that he was crying silently. His tears shone in the moonlight. I wanted to call him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to demand that he tell me what was happening, but I did nothing. I just stood there, paralyzed by fear, while he returned to his room and gently closed the door. Have you ever had that premonition that something terrible was about to happen, but did nothing to prevent it? That guilt, it haunts me to this day. I woke up before sunrise, my body vibrating with mixed anxiety and joy. The clock read 5:30 in the morning. The house was already awake. I could hear the muffled voices of the ants in the kitchen, the sound of pots being dragged, the smell of cooked rice and seaweed soup beginning to spread through the hallways. The energy of the house was palpable, as if the walls themselves were vibrating with anticipation. Min-jun's younger cousins entered my room carrying trays of tea and fresh fruit, smiling, chattering about how beautiful I would look, about how perfect the day would be. They helped me bathe, applied perfumed oils to my skin, brushed my hair until it shone like black silk. Then, with reverent care, they dressed me in the traditional hanbok, a sky-blue skirt embroidered with plum blossoms in golden threads, a white satin jacket with jade clasps, and a red sash tied around the waist. Each piece was a work of art, chosen by Minjun months before, when we were still planning every detail of our future. I looked at myself in the foggy mirror of the room. The woman who stared back at me was radiant. Naturally flushed cheeks, eyes shining with contained tears of happiness, a shy and hopeful smile. I looked like the protagonist of an ancient fairy tale, and for a moment, one single perfect moment, I believed I was finally living my happy ending. The hours passed slowly, stretched by anxiety. 7 in the morning, 8, 9, 10. The house buzzed with activity. The altar was being set up in the main garden, a canopy of white fabric decorated with cherry blossom branches and colorful paper lanterns. Red and gold silk cushions were arranged on a polished wooden platform. Incense burned in bronze braziers, releasing perfumed smoke that rose in lazy spirals to the cloudless blue sky. Guests began arriving at 9:30. Uncles dressed in gray and brown handbucks, aunts with their finest traditional jewelry, small cousins running through the garden with their new clothes already somewhat messy, family friends murmuring compliments about how beautiful the decoration was, village neighbors bringing gifts wrapped in colorful fabrics. I was in the waiting room, a small room at the back of the house, breathing deeply, trying to calm my nerves. One of the cousins held my hand, smiling reassuringly. "You look beautiful, Ha-Rin. Minjun is going to cry when he sees you." 10:30. Time for the ceremony to begin. But Minjun did not appear. At first I thought he was just running late. Maybe he had forgotten something important and went back to get it. Maybe he was too nervous and needed one more minute to compose himself. These things happen, right? Last-minute delays, small setbacks that later become funny stories to tell grandchildren. 10:45. One of the uncles went to look for him. He returned 15 minutes later, his forehead furrowed with concern. 11 o'clock. The aunts began murmuring among themselves, casting worried glances in my direction, trying to disguise but clearly alarmed. 11:15. Mrs. Kim entered the waiting room, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Ha-Rin, dear, we cannot find Minjun." The words took time to make sense, as if she were speaking in a foreign language that I knew but could not process. "What do you mean you cannot find him?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. "He is not in his room. No one has seen him since last night. His wedding clothes are still hanging, untouched. He is just not here." The world began to spin. The walls of the room closed in. The air became heavy, difficult to breathe. "This does not make sense," I said, more to myself than to her. He would not do this. He would not leave me. But the expression on Mrs. Kim's face said everything. She did not understand either. But it was happening. That was when Minjun's father entered. A tall man with broad shoulders and thick eyebrows, always so serious and imposing. But at that moment, he looked broken, aged, carrying a burden too heavy. He approached slowly, avoiding my gaze. "Ha-Rin, where is he?" I asked, my voice beginning to crack. "Mr. Kim, where is your son?" He took a deep breath, and I saw his hands tremble at his sides. "Minjun, he asked me to give you this, in case he could not be here." He extended a white envelope, folded and slightly crumpled, as if it had been held very tightly. I looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. I did not want to take it, because taking it would mean accepting. It would mean admitting that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. But my hands moved on their own, taking the envelope. My fingers trembled so much I could barely open it. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with Minjun's familiar handwriting, but hurried, trembling, desperate. "Ha-Rin, forgive me. Forgive me for not having the courage to stay. Forgive me for not having the strength to tell you the truth face to face. Forgive me for being the villain of this story. I love you more than life, but sometimes, love means letting go. It means choosing pain to protect the one we love from even greater pain. Keep living. Please, keep smiling, creating, loving. Do not let my absence steal your light. You always were, and always will be, the best part of my life. M." The letter fell from my hands. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not beg for explanations. My legs simply gave way. I fell to the cold wooden floor, still dressed in that beautiful handbook that would never fulfill its purpose. The cousins rushed to me, holding my arms, trying to lift me, but I had no more strength. I had nothing left. I stayed there, paralyzed, while I vaguely heard the voices around me, someone saying to cancel the ceremony, someone crying, Someone leaving hurriedly to speak with the guests. The world kept spinning, but I had stopped. When the pain is too great, it does not come out through the eyes. It stays trapped, heavy, suffocating, like an invisible hand squeezing your chest until you can no longer breathe, like drowning in air, like screaming in silence. And that was exactly what happened to me that day. The rest of the day passed like a blurred nightmare. Faces approached and moved away. Mouths moved, but I did not hear the words. Hands touched me, but I did not feel them. I was physically present but absent in all other senses. The guests left gradually, some with genuine pity in their eyes, offering awkward hugs and empty words of consolation. Others with poorly disguised curiosity, probably already planning how they would tell this story to friends and neighbors. And a few with that dark pleasure that certain people feel when witnessing the misfortune of others. Morbid entertainment disguised as concern. The aunts dismantled the altar. They stored the silk cushions in wooden boxes. They extinguished the incense that was still burning, releasing its last spirals of perfumed smoke into nothingness. They collected the flowers that would never be used in a wedding. They took down the paper lanterns that should have illuminated a celebration of love, not a funeral of dreams. The house, which hours before had vibrated with joy and anticipation, was now immersed in a heavy and awkward silence, the kind of silence that weighs on shoulders, that fills the air, and makes each breath a conscious effort. I remained in the guest room, still dressed in the bridal handbook, not because I wanted to, but because I simply could not gather the energy to take it off. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, my reflection in the mirror no longer making sense. That radiant woman had disappeared. In her place, there was only a lost girl, betrayed, destroyed, an empty shell dressed in broken promises. The afternoon dragged on. The sun crossed the sky slowly, the shadows changing angle, the golden afternoon light giving way to the gray of dusk. I watched everything through the window, distant, as if I were watching a movie in slow motion. Mrs. Kim came to see me several times. She sat silently by my side, saying nothing, just being present. One time, she held my hand, and I realized she was crying too. Not for me, but for her son, for the mystery of his disappearance, for the shame he had brought to the family, for the pain of not understanding. He would not do this without reason, she whispered, more to herself than to me. My son, he is not like this. Something is wrong, very wrong. But I could not comfort her. I could barely comfort myself. At night, the house became completely silent. Even the normal sounds, the creaking of floorboards, the wind in the trees, the distant breaking of waves, seemed to respect the morning that hung over all of us, and it was in that sepulchral silence, in that heavy darkness, that I heard it. A sound coming from downstairs, a slight crack, as if someone had dropped something, or as if an old door had opened by itself, its rusty hinges protesting against the movement. I remembered perfectly Minjun's grandmother, a small, wrinkled lady with white hair pulled into a tight bun so firm it pulled the skin of her temples, giving her a permanently surprised expression. She had black, penetrating eyes that seemed to see through people, and a voice that, despite her age, still carried authority. On the first day I spent in that house, she pulled me aside in the hallway, her bony fingers gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Never go down to the basement, child," she said, her voice hoarse but serious. "That place holds things that should remain buried, memories that are better left unburied." "Why?" I asked, more curious than scared. She shook her head, releasing my wrist. "Because some truths do more harm than good. Promise you will not go down there." I promised. But promises made before pain mean nothing when you are broken and desperate for answers. That night, with my heart broken and my mind confused, something inside me, a force I cannot explain, a visceral need to understand, pushed me downstairs. I got up from the bed as if I were in a trance. I took the old lantern that was hanging on the hallway wall, an oxidized metal lantern that probably had decades, maybe centuries. My bare feet touched the cold wooden floor of the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, as if protesting against my invasion, as if warning me to go back. But I kept descending, step after step, the air becoming heavier, more humid, colder. It smelled of mold, old paper, wood slowly rotting, and something else, something indefinable. Perhaps sadness, perhaps pain accumulated over decades, perhaps the ghosts of secrets kept too long. The basement was smaller than I imagined. It had a low ceiling, so low that I, despite not being very tall, needed to be careful not to hit my head on the beams. The dark wood was covered with cobwebs that shone like silver threads in the faint light of the lantern. Boxes were stacked against the walls, some open and spilling their contents. Old clothes, moldy books, yellowed photographs. My heart beat so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears, pulsing in my temples. Each breath seemed amplified in the dense silence. I walked slowly among the piles of forgotten objects. There was a rusty bicycle leaning in a corner, the broken chain hanging like a dead snake. There were old suitcases with travel tags for places that no longer existed. There was a wooden crib covered by a sheet, and I wondered which child had slept there, how many years ago. And then, in the farthest corner, covered by a heavily dusty white sheet, there was a small table. Something pulled me toward it. An intuition, a premonition. When I pulled the cloth, a cloud of dust rose into the air like a ghost being released, making me cough and cover my nose with the sleeve of the handbook. And there, among yellowed old photographs of people I did not recognize, books with loose pages and broken spines, and objects forgotten by time, was a notebook. A notebook with a navy blue cover, worn at the edges, stained in some places by water or tears. His name, Min Jun, was handwritten on the cover, in black ink already faded but still legible. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the lantern. The metal was cold against my sweaty palm. I sat on the dusty floor, not caring that the white handbok would get dirty. I leaned my back against the cold, damp wall, feeling the moisture penetrating the fabric, and I opened the notebook. The first pages were innocent, mundane, almost painfully normal. Shopping lists. Milk, eggs, that coffee Ha-Rin likes, strawberries if they are fresh. Notes about the weather. It rained today. Ha-Rin hates it when she forgets her umbrella. Need to remember to put an extra one in her bag. Small drawings. He was not an artist like me, but he tried. Scribbles of the two of us. Me holding ice cream in Han River Park, my hair blowing in the wind drawn with hurried lines. Him and me sitting on the couch, my feet on his lap while I drew, and he worked on the laptop. There were lists of movies he wanted to show me. Eternal Sunshine. Will make her cry, but also think. Emily. She will love the colors and cinematography. Restaurants he wanted to take me to. That jjajangmyeon place in Myeongdong. She always wanted to try it. Restaurant at Ensol Tower for our 2-year anniversary. Trips we planned to take together. Japan in spring. See the cherry blossoms in Kyoto. Europe someday. She wants to see the museums in Paris. Each word was a painful reminder of a future that would never happen. Each unrealized plan was a stab. Each unlived dream was a scar. But as I turned the pages, something changed. The handwriting became different. Hurried, trembling, desperate. The lines began to bend, as if he were writing with violently shaking hands. The words became less coherent, more fragmented. I cannot tell her. How do I say I am dying? She deserves a future, not mourning. I am being a coward. I know, but I cannot see that light in her eyes fade. My stomach turned. Tears began to blur my vision, but I kept reading, desperate to understand. And then, among the final pages, I found folded papers, medical documents, hospital reports, test results. I unfolded the first paper with trembling fingers. The header read, Seoul University Hospital, Department of Hematological Oncology. The word oncology jumped from the page like a silent scream. I continued reading, my eyes desperately running through the technical words I could barely understand. Patient, Kim Min Jun, 29 years old. Diagnosis, acute myeloid leukemia, AML. Stage, advanced with infiltration into the central nervous system. Prognosis, reserved. Estimated 5-year survival rate of less than 15%. Treatment, aggressive chemotherapy initiated. Insufficient response. Palliative care recommended. And then, at the top of the report, a date that made my world completely crumble. 3 months before our wedding. 3 months. He had known for 3 months. While we chose flowers for the ceremony, he knew. While we tasted menus for the banquet, he knew. While I designed personalized invitations, pouring love into each line, he knew. While we made love, whispering promises of forever, he knew there was no forever. And he never told me. Do you know that moment when your mind simply stops functioning? When you read something so devastating, so completely destroying, that your brain refuses to process it? As if there were a mental fuse that burns out to protect you from an unbearable truth? That was exactly what happened to me. I stayed there, holding that paper, looking at the words without really seeing them, as if I were floating outside my own body, as if I were watching another person discover that the man she loved was dying, had been dying all this time. There were more papers. I went through them with trembling hands and tear-blurred eyes. Prescriptions for medications with impossible names. Side effects listed in small print: severe nausea, extreme fatigue, loss of appetite, muscle weakness, increased risk of infections. Suddenly everything made sense. The weight loss, the tiredness, the routine checkups, the unexplained absences, the moments when he looked at me as if he were memorizing me, as if he were storing every detail to take with him wherever he was going. He was dying, and I, blind and stupidly happy, did not notice. I turned back the pages of the notebook with fingers that no longer felt like mine, and that was when I found the letters, all addressed to me, all unsent, all stored there, in that forgotten basement, like confessions he did not have the courage to make face to face. The first began like this: "My Harin, if you are reading this, it is because I could not tell you in time. It is because I was too cowardly, too weak, too selfish. It is because I loved you too much to trap you in endless pain. I wanted to marry you. God knows how much I wanted to. I dreamed of that day from the first time I saw you in the cafe in Hongdae. You with your hair tied up any which way, paint stains on your fingers, laughing at something on your phone. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I knew, in that exact moment, that you would be the woman of my life. I planned everything. How I would propose to you. I spent 3 months planning that night in the snow. Where we would live. I thought about that apartment in Yeonnam, near the park where you like to draw. How many children we would have. 2, maybe 3, all with your eyes. How we would grow old together, sitting on the porch, you still drawing, me photographing you drawing. But time denied me. The universe denied me. My own body betrayed me. When the doctors told me the diagnosis, my first reaction was not fear of death. It was fear of losing you, of seeing you suffer gradually, of seeing you watching me wither, disappear, transform into someone unrecognizable. I could not bear the idea of turning you into a widow before even being my wife. So I chose to be the villain of our story. I chose to disappear. I chose for you to hate me, because hatred is easier to carry than pity, than guilt, than the slow pain of watching me leave centimeter by centimeter day after day. I chose to be the man who abandoned you at the altar. Because that, at least, you can overcome. That you can heal from. But watching me die, that would destroy you in a way you would never recover from. Forgive me, Harin. Forgive me for being too weak to stay. Forgive me for not having the courage to tell you the truth. Forgive me for leaving you alone on the day that should have been the happiest of our lives. But know this. Know it with every cell of your being. I loved you until my last breath. And wherever I am now, if there is something beyond this life, I still love you. I will always love you. Live, my love. Live for both of us. Smile. Create. Love again. Do not let my absence steal your light, because you are pure light, Harin, and the world needs that light. Forever yours, Minjun. P.S. At the bottom of the 3rd drawer of my desk in the apartment, there is a red box. It is for you. It always was for you. The tears finally came, hot, silent, uncontrollable. They ran down my face, staining the handbag, dripping onto the yellowed pages of the notebook. Each word of his was a piece of my heart breaking and simultaneously recomposing itself. Each sentence was an explanation and a farewell, a request for forgiveness, and a supreme act of sacrificial love. He did not run away out of cowardice. He ran away out of love, out of fear of imprisoning me in a slow, inevitable, devastating pain. In that cold and dark basement, with the smell of mold and forgotten memories surrounding me like a heavy cloak, I understood one of the most painful and beautiful truths of life. Sometimes, love is not presence. It is renunciation. It is giving up your own happiness to protect the happiness of the one you love. It is choosing lonely suffering to spare the other from shared agony. Have you ever been loved like that? So deeply that someone chose to leave to set you free? I do not know if this is the purest love or the cruelest pain. Perhaps it is both. There were more letters. I read them all, one after another, each word engraving itself permanently on my soul. In one, he wrote about our first trip together to Busan, where we spent a weekend eating seafood and walking on the beach. I was already sick that day, the first symptoms. But seeing you happy, with your feet in the sand, the wind in your hair, laughing when the waves got you wet, it was worth every second. I kept that image for the bad days I knew would come. In another, about the night he proposed to me, I knew I was being selfish. I knew that proposing to you when I was already sick was cruel. But I needed to, Haran. I needed to live that moment. I needed to see you say yes, even knowing I would never make it to the altar. Forgive me for that. And in one last one, written just days before the wedding, with handwriting so trembling it was barely legible, I cannot hide it anymore. The body is giving up. The pains are constant now. I know I do not have much time left. That is why I am leaving tonight. I am going to a hospital far away, where no one knows me, where I can die without dragging you with me to the bottom. You will hate me. You will think I abandoned you, and that is okay. I would rather be hated by you and know you are free than be loved by you and trap you in endless pain. Goodbye, my love, my light, my life. Thank you for loving me. They were the best 3 years of my existence. I stayed in that basement until dawn, embracing the notebook, reading and rereading each word, each letter, each drawing, each fragment of a love that never had the chance to be completely lived, but that was more real and deep than most loves that last decades. I felt the cold floor under my numb knees, the weight of silence around me, the distant echo of the sea outside breaking against the rocks, like a heart beating, persistent, relentless, alive. When the first ray of sun entered through the tiny basement window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air like restless little spirits, I realized something fundamental. There was no anger in me. There should have been. I had every right to be furious. He lied. He hid. He fled. He left me there, dressed as a bride, waiting for a groom who would never come. But all I felt was a longing that hurt beautifully, a belated understanding of a sacrifice I never asked for, but that he made anyway, a reverent respect for an impossible choice he made alone, carrying the weight so I would not have to carry it. He loved me enough to let me go, and that, I was beginning to understand, was perhaps the purest and most devastating form of love that exists. In the following days, no one spoke about Min Jun anymore. The family operated under a silent agreement not to mention the subject. They talked about the weather, about the neighbors, about trivial village news, anything except the missing son and fiancé. Mrs. Kim brought me tea every morning, sitting with me in respectful silence. Sometimes she cried quietly, wiping away tears with an embroidered linen handkerchief. Other times she just held my hand, sharing the pain without words. Mr. Kim avoided my gaze, but I saw the guilt deeply engraved on his aged face. He knew. He had to know. Parents always know when something is wrong with their children. But he respected Min Jun's wish to keep the secret, and now he carried the weight of that complicity. 3 days after the cancelled wedding, the family received the news. Min Jun had passed away in a hospital in a distant city. Multiple organ failure, the doctors said. Quick, painless, they hoped. The funeral was small, private, only immediate family. There was no grand ceremony. Min Jun had left clear instructions, nothing elaborate, nothing that attracted attention. Just a simple cremation, ashes scattered in the sea around Jeju. I went. Of course I went. Not as a bride, but as, what? Ex-fiancé? Widow of a marriage that never happened? There was no word for what I was. I stayed in the back, watching his mother collapse, supported by relatives. Watching his father, firm and silent, holding emotions with pure willpower. Watching the urn being taken to the sea, the ashes mixing with the waves, returning to the universe. And when it was over, when everyone had left, I stayed alone on the beach. I looked at the sea, infinite, indifferent, eternal, and I whispered, I understand, I forgive you, and I love you. The words were carried by the wind to wherever he was. I left Jeju the next day. I stored the notebook inside my suitcase, along with the bridal hanbok that was never used for its purpose. A rainy morning. The ferry cut through the gray waves, and I watched the island disappear into the mist, carrying with it a chapter of my life that would never be concluded, only abruptly closed. Returning to Seoul was like crossing a mirror and discovering that the world on the other side was exactly the same, but you were completely different. The city remained exactly the same. Hurried subway trains, crowded with people looking at cell phone screens, tired faces returning from monotonous jobs. Smell of tteokbokki and hotteok at street food stalls. Vendors shouting offers that no one really listened to. Neon lights blinking in Gangnam storefronts. Promoting products no one needed but everyone wanted. The constant sound of horns, overlapping conversations, music leaking from stores, the infinite cacophony of urban life. But I was completely different. Everything seemed slower, denser, as if time had learned to respect my pauses, my irregular breaths, my heart that still bled inside even though no one could see the wound. For months, I could not sleep. My small apartment in Mapo-gu, a cramped studio on the 5th floor of an old building, with windows overlooking a noisy street where cars passed at all hours, became simultaneously my refuge and my prison. Sometimes, I woke up in the middle of the night with the absolute certainty that I had heard his voice calling me. Harin, soft as always, carrying that tone of tenderness that made me melt. I would sit up in bed, heart racing, eyes scanning the darkness, waiting to see his silhouette in the doorway, but there were only shadows and silence. Other times I dreamed I was back on the veranda in Jeju, and he hugged me, saying everything was okay, that it had just been a terrible nightmare, that the wedding would happen, that we would have our life together after all. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that waking up was like dying a little. The worst were the moments of momentary forgetfulness, picking up the phone to send a message about something funny I saw on the street, only to remember he was no longer there to receive it. Cooking ramyun, and automatically grabbing 2 sets of chopsticks before realizing, seeing something beautiful, a particularly dramatic sunset, cherry blossom petals falling on a quiet street, and turning to share the moment, only to find empty space. Each time I forgot and remembered was like being abandoned at the altar again. A small death, a small mourning. I did not tell anyone about the notebook, about the letters, about the truth. My best friend, Soo Jin, visited me every weekend. She brought jjajangmyeon from a restaurant she swore made the best in the city, and tried to make me laugh with bad jokes and gossip about mutual acquaintances. She sat on my tiny couch, legs crossed, looking at me with such genuine concern that sometimes it hurt more than the sadness itself. "Harin, you need to leave the house," she would say gently. "You need to get back to living." "I am living," I would reply, but we both knew it was a lie. My mother called every day, every single night. At 8 o'clock on the dot, like clockwork, my phone would ring. "Did you eat today?" "Yes, Mom." "What?" "I do not remember." "Harin." "I am fine, Mom. I promise." More lies, but necessary lies. Because how do you explain to your mother that you are mourning a man who was technically, alive when he disappeared? How do you explain that you are crying over a love that was never officially consummated? How do you explain that you feel like a widow without ever having been a wife? I started avoiding places that reminded me of him. The cafe in Hongdae where we met was demolished to make way for a convenience store, and I felt guilty relief at not having to consciously decide to avoid it anymore. I could not watch the movies we used to watch together, curled up on the couch, my feet in his lap, sharing popcorn that always ended up more on our faces than in our mouths due to our laughter. I could not listen to the songs he played in the car when we drove aimlessly through the roads of Gangwon-do. Once, one of those songs played randomly on my playlist while I was on the subway. I had to get off at the next station and sit on the platform bench, breathing deeply, fighting back tears, while hurried people passed without noticing the broken girl among them. The world kept spinning. People kept living, loving, laughing, celebrating. Weddings happened. Babies were born. Life pulsed vibrant and indifferent around me. But I was stuck in that April morning, at the empty altar, in the cherry blossom petals falling like tears over a love that never had the chance to fully bloom. But do you know what is interesting about pain? It does not disappear. It never completely disappears. But, with time, and it takes much more time than anyone tells you, it changes, it transforms, it stops being an open and bleeding wound, infected and throbbing, and becomes a scar. And scars, I discovered, are just skin that learned to be stronger. It was on an autumn afternoon, exactly 6 months after everything, that I had a moment of unexpected clarity. I was walking aimlessly through the city, something I had done so many times in recent months that my feet already knew the paths by heart. I tried to lose myself in the crowds, use the chaos and noise of the city to silence the constant thoughts in my head. I ended up stopping at Bampo Bridge, the one that crosses the Han River and has the famous colored water jets at night. During the day, it is just another bridge, functional, full of traffic, nothing special. But there is a pedestrian path on the sides, and sometimes people stop there to look at the river, breathe, exist for a moment outside the constant rush. The wind was cold and cutting, typical of Korean autumn, when the stubborn summer finally admits defeat. It brought the smell of the river, slightly dirty but alive water, mixed with the aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby stall. The elderly vendor shouting prices that no one negotiated. I leaned against the metal railing, hands on the cold handrail, looking at the dark water below. Small boats glided slowly across the surface, some for tourism, others just crossing. I watched the waves formed by the boats, expanding in concentric circles before disappearing. And then, for an instant, just a fleeting but deeply real instant, I felt as if Minjun were there beside me. Not literally, not as a physical presence, not the way movies make you believe it happens, but as a sensation, as a gentle presence pressing the air beside me, comforting and familiar. I closed my eyes. The wind messed up my hair, pushing loose strands against my face, and I imagined, with every gram of concentration I had, what he would say if he could speak to me at that moment. "You are still alive, Harin." I could hear his voice, as clear as if it were real. "So live. Live for me. Live for the two people I could not be. The one who died, and the one you were before you met me. I did not die, so you would die too. I died so you could continue. Do not waste that." I opened my eyes. Tears ran silently, carried by the wind before they even reached my jaw. It was at that moment I realized the pain was not going away, probably never would completely. There would always be a mark, a shadow, an empty space in his shape that nothing would ever fill perfectly. But it no longer drowned me. It no longer paralyzed me. It no longer prevented me from breathing. I was still standing, still here, still alive, and that, I realized with sudden and almost painful clarity, was a victory. A small, fragile, but real victory. Sometimes life breaks us, not to destroy us, but to mold us into something stronger, to reshape us, to teach us that we can survive what we thought would kill us. That was what happened to me. Slowly, very slowly, I began to return. Not to the person I was before. That person had died that morning in Jeju, but to a new version, a reconstruction, a renewal. I started drinking coffee in the morning again, sitting on the tiny veranda of my apartment. You can barely call it a veranda. It is more like a piece of concrete with railings, watching the sun rise between the gray buildings of Seoul. The first rays of light tinging the sky pink and orange, promising a new day, offering a new beginning. I started listening to music again. First the songs that did not remind me of him. New music, artists I discovered later, sounds that did not carry painful memories. Then, gradually, even those we used to share. And I discovered something surprising. The songs no longer hurt. They brought a sweet, nostalgic longing, but not destructive. I started going out with Sujin again, laughing at her bad jokes, and eventually, surprisingly, making my own jokes, sharing soju in small hidden bars in Itaewon, those tiny places with only 5 tables where everyone knows your name after the second visit, dancing in cheap karaoke places until late at night, shouting lyrics to old Korean songs, our voices terrible, but our intentions pure. And I started painting again. I had completely abandoned my brushes and canvases after that morning in Jeju. It seemed that creativity had died along with my dreams, that the part of me that created beauty had been buried in the same place as my love. I looked at my small easel leaning in the corner of the apartment and felt nothing, an emptiness where there had once been passion. But one afternoon, I was looking out the apartment window, watching autumn leaves falling from the trees on the street, yellow and red leaves dancing in the wind, landing gently on the rain-wet asphalt, creating a mosaic of colors against the gray, and something inside me, something that had been asleep, hibernating, waiting, awakened. I did not think. I just moved. I bought new paints at an art supply store in Insadong, feeling the familiar weight of the tubes in my hands. I set up my small easel in the apartment living room, the white canvas challenging me, inviting me, calling me, and I painted. I painted the pain. Dark and heavy colors, deep purples and almost black blues, swirls of emotion that did not fit into words. I painted the longing, soft gray tones, mists and shadows, shapes that almost appear but never completely, always at the periphery of vision. I painted the cherry blossoms of Jeju, delicate pink against blue sky, petals falling eternally, ephemeral beauty captured for a moment. I painted the empty altar, white and gold, light and shadow, presence through absence. And in the end, I painted myself, not destroyed, not broken beyond repair, but reborn, scarred, with marks, yes, with visible pain in the brushstrokes, but standing, alive, breathing. I became again, not the same person as before, I never would be, but a new version, rebuilt, carrying scars that now were part of my identity, scars that told my story without needing words. I stored Minjun's notebook in a special box I bought from an antique shop in Insadong. The box is dark wood, heavy, with delicate carvings of plum blossoms that run all over the lid. It has an aged bronze clasp that creaks slightly when opened, a sound I learned to love because it means I am about to be close to him again, in a way. Inside the box, besides the notebook, I placed all the papers I found in the basement, the individual letters, each carefully folded as he left them. The medical reports, which still make my stomach turn when I see them, but are an essential part of the complete story. And an old photo of the two of us, taken on a summer day at Nami Island, both smiling under the ginkgo trees, their leaves in an incandescent yellow in the background, our faces radiant with simple and uncomplicated happiness. We did not know that day that it would be one of the last really, truly happy moments we would have together. We did not know he was already carrying the weight of a secret that would eventually separate us. We did not know we were taking photos to store in mourning boxes instead of wedding albums. But perhaps it is better this way, that we were happy while we could be. I never showed the notebook to anyone, not even to Sujin, who knows practically all my secrets, not to my mother, who always wanted to understand what really happened, not to his family, who perhaps deserved to know that he died thinking of them, loving them, because certain stories do not need to be explained or shared. They just need to be felt, honored, kept in the heart like small, painful treasures we carry with us. Sometimes, on lonely nights, when rain beats against the window creating hypnotic patterns on the glass, when the city outside finally quiets down a bit, when the weight of memory becomes too heavy to carry alone, I open the box. The smell of old paper greets me, mixed with a ghost of the perfume he wore, and that somehow still remains on the pages. I read one or two letters, chosen randomly, like messages from an alternative universe where he still exists. I run my fingers over his trembling handwriting, feeling the imperfections of the paper where the pen pressed harder in moments of intense emotion. I feel the weight of words not spoken face to face, of silent farewells, of love he carried alone until he could not anymore. And I cry, not from pure sadness, not anymore, but from gratitude, from acceptance, from a deep and transformative understanding. Gratitude because he loved me enough to let me go. Gratitude because he chose to carry the pain alone so I would not have to share the weight. Gratitude because, even at the end, even dying, even suffering, he was still trying to protect me. And that, I realized, is the greatest gift anyone can give, not their presence, but their chosen, sacrificial absence that liberates instead of imprisons. The years passed. 3 years became 4. 4 became 5. The calendar kept turning pages, indifferent to human pain, persistent in its eternal forward movement. And every spring, when the cherry blossoms bloom and paint Korea in pink and white, transforming the country into a living picture of ephemeral beauty, I make the same pilgrimage. I take the train to Busan, then the ferry to Jeju, staying on the upper deck as we always did, feeling the sea wind, smelling the salt. I rent a small car at the port. I drive along the winding roads of the island to that familiar hill. The house is still there, smaller in my memory perhaps, or maybe I grew, but essentially the same. The cherry blossoms keep blooming, indifferent to human tragedy, following their eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The stone lanterns still guard the garden like silent sentinels. The pond still reflects the sky. The golden carp still swim lazily in infinite circles. Minjun's family welcomes me with sad but genuinely warm smiles. Mrs. Kim, a little more bent each year, a little grayer, but with the same kind eyes, always prepares ginger tea, served in the same porcelain cups with flying cranes, as if time had stopped in that specific ritual. We talk about trivial things. The weather, always a concern on the island. The neighbors who married, who had children, who died. Changes in the village, a new road, a restaurant that closed, tourists who increase each year. No one mentions Minjun, Not from forgetting, never from forgetting, but from respect for the sacred silence that surrounds certain losses, from understanding that some pains do not need to be constantly named to be recognized. After tea, I walk alone to the garden. My feet know the way by heart now, to the stone gate covered in moss, where the cherry blossoms grow especially dense, creating a natural canopy of pink flowers. And I leave a white flower, always a white flower, usually a lily, symbol of purity and transition, sometimes a white rose, eternal love and reverence, occasionally a white orchid, rare beauty and lasting love, not as someone saying goodbye, not anymore, but as someone giving thanks. I stay there for a few minutes, sometimes longer, if the day is especially beautiful, and the wind carries a sweet smell of flowers, looking at the mountains in the distance, where earth meets sky in an infinite horizon, listening to the sound of wind through the trees, an ancient and comforting whisper, smelling spring, damp earth, blooming flowers, life being reborn against all odds. And always, always I whisper the same thing. Thank you, Minjun, for loving me, for leaving me, for teaching me that true love is sometimes knowing when to leave. You are at peace now, and I am learning to be too. The house seems smaller each year, or maybe I grew, not physically, but emotionally, expanded, matured, transformed by pain into something more resilient. The cherry blossoms keep blooming every year, indifferent to human tragedy, following their eternal cycle. And perhaps that is exactly it. Life continues, relentless and beautiful, even when love departs, especially when love departs. I learned many things in these years. I learned that pain is not the enemy. It is a teacher, a cruel and relentless teacher, yes, but one who teaches lessons that no joy could teach. I learned that losing someone is devastating, but losing yourself in the process of losing someone is even worse. It is a double death of the person who left and the person you were. I learned that true love does not demand permanence. It does not demand physical presence. Sometimes it asks for exactly the opposite, the courage to say goodbye, to release, to let go so the other can continue breathing, living, being. Minjun taught me that. Not with words while he was alive, he never could, but with his eloquent absence, with his posthumous letters, with his silent sacrifice. And today, finally, I understand. Today, I accept. Today, I give thanks. Today, when I see couples walking through the streets of Seoul, holding hands, laughing, sharing earphones with just one earbud for each, sharing ice cream with 2 spoons, existing in their own private universe of 2, I do not feel envy. I do not feel sadness. I do not feel bitterness or resentment. I do not ask myself, why them and not me? I feel gratitude, deep, sincere, transformative gratitude. Gratitude for having known a love so pure it preferred to disappear rather than cause prolonged pain. A love that chose sacrifice over selfishness. A love that truly loved, not possessively or dependently, but liberatingly. Gratitude for having lived, even briefly, something that many people spend their whole lives seeking and never find. A love that sees you completely, accepts you totally, loves you unconditionally. Gratitude for having learned that true love does not always stay. Sometimes it says goodbye, silently, respectfully, lovingly, so we learn to live without it, so we learn to be complete alone, so we do not become prisoners of emotional dependency, because in the end, in the true, definitive end, Minjun did not abandon me. He freed me. He freed me from the pain of watching him slowly wither, his body betraying him little by little, day after day. He freed me from the guilt of not being able to save him, of being powerless against the illness. He freed me from the prison that would be a love kept alive only by pity, obligation, or fear of letting go. He loved me enough to let me go. And that, I discovered in the years since, is the purest, rarest, most precious form of love that exists. In Korea, I learned that even the coldest, darkest, most relentless winter holds a spring waiting to be born in its frozen entrails. I learned that losing someone is sad, devastatingly, incapacitatingly sad. But losing yourself in the process is even more devastating. And I almost lost myself. I almost let that pain swallow me completely, consume me until nothing recognizable remained. But I found my way back. It was not easy. It was not quick. It was not linear. There were good days followed by bad weeks, moments of hope followed by relapses into darkness. It was painful, slow, full of setbacks, and nights when I questioned whether it was worth continuing. But I continued, one day at a time, one breath at a time, one white flower at a time. And now, years later, I live, not just exist, not just survive, but truly live. I paint, I smile, I love again, differently, more carefully, with visible scars, but also with a capacity for appreciation that only loss teaches. And every time the wind blows through the mountains of Jeju, every time I smell cherry blossoms blooming in spring, every time I see the colored water jets at Bampo Bridge reflecting the full moon, I like to think it is him, still here, somehow mysterious and inexplicable. In every detail of life he taught me to love again. In every sunset I stopped to appreciate. In every moment of beauty, I choose not to let pass unnoticed. Telling me, softly, through the wind, through the flowers, through memories that no longer hurt, but just comfort. You did it, Haran. You bloomed again. I am proud of you. Keep blooming. He left me alone at the altar, but in the basement of that old house, among yellowed papers and words unspoken in life, I discovered the purest love that ever existed, the one that prefers to disappear rather than hurt the one it loves. And today, finally, I understand. I accept. I honor. I give thanks. Because he taught me that the greatest proof of love is not staying when it is easy. It is knowing when to leave. It is choosing lonely and silent suffering to spare the other from shared and prolonged pain. It is loving so deeply that you are willing to be the villain in the other's story, so the other can be free. Minjun died, but his love remains, alive, pulsing, eternal, in the flowers that bloom every spring, promising renewal, in the waves that break on the rocks of Jeju, relentless and beautiful, in every sunrise I witness, each new day that gifts me with possibilities, in every breath I can still take, every heartbeat that continues, insistently alive, he remains, and I, finally, learn to live with that, not despite the pain but through it, not avoiding the memory but embracing it, not pretending it never happened, but honoring that it happened and changed me permanently. The pain transformed me, but it did not destroy me, and that is all he asked for. If this story touched your heart deeply, if you have ever loved someone who left without warning or fully explaining, if you have ever had to rebuild yourself alone after being completely destroyed, if you know the pain of a love that ended not because it stopped existing but because circumstances were stronger, leave a heart in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to know that pain can be transformed into strength, that suffering can be alchemy for growth, that we can break completely and still learn to bloom again. And always remember, with every fiber of your being, you are stronger than you imagine. You are more resilient than you believe. You have within you a capacity for healing and renewal that is almost magical, and you deserve to bloom again. Deserve love, deserve happiness, deserve to live fully, without guilt, without shame for leaving behind what no longer serves. Winter always ends, no matter how long and cruel, and the cherry blossoms always return, without fail, year after year, always, promised.